Kinga, thank you for our invitation.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for invitation. Thank you very much for also our long-standing cooperation. Was happy to exchange the views and conduct activities and research together.
Exactly the same on our part. So I would suggest let's jump right away to the discussion. My very first question would be, or my very first request would be, could you introduce us a little bit more to the current situation in the Visegrad countries? What was the reaction of the Central European countries, or more specifically, the Visegrad countries, to the COVID-19 pandemic? Maybe in comparison to the Western European countries or Southern European countries.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you also for your questions. I will not hide that all those issues that we discuss are complex, and also we lack information. We now everyone wants to build scenarios, different exit strategies, but I think it's now too early to tell. How the region or the whole EU will look like even in next month. Of course, we know now more than 2 months ago, but still this is difficult. What is surprising and also nice to hear that Central Europe it's praised by experts and by public health officials on how they have dealt and reacted to the crisis. International media recently quoted as well that Central European governments are doing much better than the Western countries. Let me tell you what factors we are looking at. So we can agree, I think, that all V4 countries relatively fast and assertive. When the pandemic started at the beginning of March, the countries were first to take lockdown measures and recommend social distancing. As well, they pretty recommended to use face masks, and they also either introduce the border controls or close the borders. It's worth mentioning that at that time it was even against the recommendations of the World Health Organizations or the EU itself, that it worked pretty well. I think borders set aside, masks now are widely recommended in many countries around the globe. What other factors influence to this policy of tackling the crisis? I think early on banning public events as well, this is again controversial, but also cross-border commuters were not allowed to move across the border. If we look at broader, we still don't know how of Central Europe case, and I don't think countries now start sharing good practices, because it's too early to say. From the history we know with the influenza that there was 3 waves, which means that we cannot now say that this will not case the case now, unless the vaccine is ready for general use. Different opinions as well, end of the year, in next 18 or 15 months. What other factors that are mentioned that have people are looking at when talking about the flu, the virus, is that culture, climate, demographics, and the speed of the government responses that I mentioned have an impact in this case. In case of Central Europe, it's a pretty young society to compare with other with the EU average, for example, when the percentage of EU average is around 20%. Slovakia, by far the youngest population from V4, about 60%. Then is followed by Poland, 17%. And then Hungary and Czech Republic around 19%, which has also an impact why the virus maybe did not spread to such extent. When we look at the health spending, Central Europe also reacted fast because probably the governments know the limitation, and it is not to say even the countries in Western Europe could not bear the number of cases, but the health spending is below the average in the region. The most Czech Republic spends the most, and then it's Slovakia, Poland, and Hungary about 4.5% of GDP. I will maybe stop now and welcome some additional questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for this insightful discourse. You mentioned this, let's say, far-reaching measures which were introduced by Visegrad governments, let's say. But you also mentioned, or we can see that all these measures are currently being about to ease or to relax, and that the everyday life of Central European citizens is returning to, let's say, a new normal. And here I'm thinking about this semi-opening of borders, opening borders to Slovakia, to Poland, and to Austria only for the current, or I mean the limited freedom of assembly or behaving on public space. Or for example, your predictions, what do you think when we will return to the situation which we had at the beginning of this year?
And I think it's happening as well. The countries that I know the most by far, it's Slovakia and also Poland. So I will speak about those countries, but also it seems like the exit strategy is put in place, and the governments are quite responsive in the project cycle management, we call it monitoring and evaluations. This is the process that you start from the beginning of the project cycle to the very end. You have to monitor and evaluate, draw conclusions and adapt to the new reality. Maybe I will say two examples of how governments are reacting to the changing environment. First is Slovakia. Recently, there was a decision to merge, for example, in general, the exit strategy was about 4 phases. And recently, the government decided, because of the low number of cases, new cases in Slovakia, government is cautious and says, we cannot act too fast. And we still know that because the tests has not been so widespread, like, for example, Germany, there might be more cases out there that we don't know about. But there was a decision of merging 2 phases. So effective of tomorrow, we will see opening of some outdoor restaurants, some museums, and enabling people more and opening businesses as well. Some factories already, maybe not at the full speed, but Slovakia relies on the automotive sector. They've started and they open already some factories. In terms of Poland, I think this is a very special case nowadays because of the planned so-called elections that might happen in May. So far, we don't know when and how. We can discuss it further. So I would say here people are a bit skeptical about what is the real opening of the market of the social relaxing measures put in place. Is it because we are ready to do so, or is it because we want to hold elections this month? Poland took an unprecedented decision, for example, to open kindergartens as of tomorrow. As we know, in other countries, this is the last phase that governments are thinking of. So I think here people are a bit skeptical and scared in Poland that it might be too early. It is also worth mentioning that Poland is one of, I think, 4 countries in the EU where the number of cases are not that much lower. It's still on the level of more than 400. But when I wanted to say about the adjustments is precisely about the cross-border workers, because of the shutdown completely of the borders. But what is more, the requirement obligatory for every person that crosses the Polish border. People living on the Polish-German border that have their daily lives is based on living in 2 countries. The same case as in Slovakia and Kidze, or people working in Berg or Hainburg. In Poland, people started to, last week there was a big protest on the border from both sides that they should be treated differently, more than this is their natural environment. And for example, if the schools are open in Germany sooner, then the Polish children that attend the school there cannot attend. The same goes, and it has even more impact on workplaces, especially also in the medical sector. So the government adjusted now. It still does not allow the medical personnel to move, but the other jobs, other people performing different type of jobs do not require quarantine. So this was the point I wanted to make of basically monitoring, evaluating, and evaluate on everyday basis.
You mentioned these cross-border commuters, these cross-border workers on the German-Polish border. I was wondering, how is the situation on the Polish-Ukrainian border? Because we know that every year, like over, I think, 1 million of Ukrainian workers are coming to Poland to work. How is the situation there? Are there any protests, or is there actually any discussion about it in Poland?
Yeah, it's very, very interesting that you ask, because referring also to your first questions that we had about how does the pandemic affect the region socio-politically. I think this exactly is one of the points that are being discussed about people moving back, or as in terms of the Ukraine, going back to Ukraine. So the first question is, if Polish people living abroad in, let's say, Germany and Poland, that are deprived from their job, will they come back home, or they will stay in the countries that they work and to wait through the pandemic? Or what do we do when we have a economic recession and a huge unemployment, in plus people coming back? On the other side, I think it was also related to the measures in government that reacted pretty quickly, despite low number of cases. They basically followed the Central Eastern European countries in terms of putting restrictive measures at the very beginning. They also started to close the border, which draw many Ukrainians back to Ukraine. I read the statistics that around 100 140,000, nobody knows, but that many people came back to Ukraine, and this will be have a huge impact as well on the socio-economic environment in Poland. But I think when the situation stabilized, if the Poles do not come back, then the movement and the Ukrainians will come back to Poland, which is slowly happening again.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So, except for this discussion about these commuters and cross-border workers, can we maybe common patterns of the impact of the pandemic in this region, in the Visegrad countries, when it comes to society, to politics, maybe to economy?
I was thinking about two other issues, and it's about the support, as also in other countries, the governmental and the measures imposed are welcomed by society. Around 50% of society supports the measures taken by the governments. Let it be Slovakia, Poland, Hungary, or Czech Republic. What is more, I think this digital transformation will have a huge impact on transformation of our society and economy as well. Central European economies are resilient on manufacturing, and with this new type of working that we do, and many companies were not prepared for it, the digital transformation will speed up definitely, and this will have an impact, of course, on the life of people as well. The other trend that unfortunately we are seeing, that the case of Poland and Hungary shows that the pandemic is also used to maybe consolidate the governmental power, or use it in the way that will play more into the party politics rather than thinking about the health of the governments. From Polish experience, we might say that people are a bit concerned, and especially the people who do not support the ruling party, that they would prefer seeing a more frank discussion and dialogue with the citizens about how we are tackling the consequences of the crisis, rather than looking at the political fights over the upcoming elections.
Yeah, so you already mentioned it. So what's the political communication of the Polish government? How they are communicating with the population when it comes to pandemic, when it comes to strategies, how to ease all these restrictions and so on?
I would say when I looked at and compared it with Slovakia, Polish government reacted pretty fast as well. Of course, the virus, because of the hotspots in Italy, Slovakia or Czech Republic and Hungary were more exposed to people traveling and go skiing to Italy or Austria. Also, there was a factor that, for example, in Slovakia, the winter coincided with the spread, with the outbreak of the virus in Italy. So at least in Slovakia, the government knew that there were people who has recently visited Italy. That's why around 10 or 11 of March, all restrictions were in place. In Poland, everything happened maybe 4 or 5 days later, but they were also pretty fast. So the government, I think, there is no questioning about the measure as such, even though there are few details about, like, closing, for example, forests or parks, which many people questions, because they say, it's understandable to have those restrictive measures in the cities, but why people cannot go to for a walk in the forest, also for mental and there's nothing wrong with that. To this also the government reacted and they opened them I think last week, but the main. And also there was a quite extensive package of economic measures put in place to help businesses to, I think it was a pretty good package and good communication from the government and the information. The point of many people in Poland is, why do we need elections now? And when the campaign, presidential campaign cannot be held properly, and citizens cannot learn about the views of the argument. It's not the most important, because the most important one is the health. How do we make sure we can conduct and we cannot expose people to getting virus does not get spread, while the government was okay, so we will introduce the mail-in voting system, which is doable, but once it's prepared on time, in advance, and people exactly know, and we have a system put in place. It cannot be that instead of the National Electoral Commission, now the votes and the ballots might be handled by the post office. It brings different arguments about this. Will our vote will be free and fair? Will it be secret? While and how the ballots will be delivered and collected from homes. So those are very basic and pragmatic arguments that just insist on calling free and fair, organizing free and fair elections once the country is ready for. The Polish constitution foresees this situation, and in terms of the state of emergency, the elections are suspended and then postponed after this state finishes. But the government now has a objective to hold them this month. So today we are 5th of May, and still we don't know exactly the date. We know that it must happen until 23rd of May, and on a day that is holiday, a non-working day, which basically gives us two options, 10th or 11th. In this anti-crisis shield, that was a whole package of tackling the pandemic. The government also had one article that actually the Prime Minister can call even working day as a non-working day, so people can go and vote. We don't know how this will play out, and it will be organized. What we hear now, it's most likely even the ruling party knows that on the 10th of May, as planned in the past, the elections cannot be held because the main voting on the mail-in voting system will most probably happen in 2 days, which means May 7th. So then there will be only 3 days to hold them. But there are still 10 candidates running for the post. Means that also creates a bit of confusion among the society, because it's okay, so what do we now do now? Do we, go and vote? According to the polls, if the elections are held in May, the incumbent president will win with the highest support in the history of democratic Poland. I think I saw different numbers, but it was 63% or 54%. But with the lowest turnout also in the history. at the level of, it means that the rest of the society does not want to, does not plan to actually exercise their right to vote in the presidential elections. The most committed ones seems like the supporters of the ruling party, which then makes sense in terms of the mathematics that I presented.
So if we go to the core of this issue of the presidential election in Poland, the problem is that the question why this election cannot be postponed, like we saw in case of Serbia or in case of North Macedonia, we can see that one of the EU member states is not able to postpone the election. The real reason behind it is just a pragmatic move of the ruling party. They are facing the risk that the incumbent president is not going to be re-elected.
Yeah, I think this is the right assessment, and the call basically of citizens and different NGOs groups. There was also an unprecedented letter signed prime ministers and the presidents calling for postponing the elections and also boycotting them if they happen, because they don't want to even call them presidential elections, but they call it so-called elections, which is also, I think we also see some fractions in the ruling coalition as well, because for this first time in the history of the coalition of the incumbent government, the junior coalition partner, and this is why the voting, if it happens on the 7th, is so crucial, because the main question is if these members, will they vote with opposition or not? If they withdraw their votes and support for the government, it means that the elections cannot be organized in May, because the mail-in voting system will just not be ready. They are not agreeing to this. But if they now in those days are convinced to vote along the party lines, it means that these elections will happen. And this is basically the main concern. Because in the past...
And when you speak about the opposition parties, you mean the party agreement or right?
Yes.
Okay. So what are in general the controversial points about presidential election in Poland? That actually they are, from the point of view of the constitutional point of view, that you can't do change in the electoral law in the time period less than 6 months, I think. So that's the first point. And that the second point is that normally the election in Poland, if I'm right, they are organizing by the European Commission. And this time, if the election are going to take place, it will be the case that the election are coordinating by, I think it's the Ministry for State Assets.
Yeah.
And
the postal
actually,
office.
when we are speaking about corresponding voting, the organization who is going to be responsible for the postal voting is actually the Polish Post. So how does the population react to this, that they are going to vote by post? And even if the opinion polls show us that more than 70% of Polish population actually don't want this.
Yeah, exactly. I think when it comes to the legal point, this is some measures that would allow to organize mail-in voting system was a part of the package of this anti-shield, anti-crisis shield, tarcza antykryzysowa. And the point was that because it was a whole package composed of economic measures as well, actually but also those regulations that would, for example, allow mail-in voting system, or this calling the day off on the working day to hold elections, voted in the parliament because the opposition was in favor. The broader package, they could not afford not voting it in, require that this economic packages will not be available for citizens that will deprive from their jobs. And now the discussion is about the bill that will be voted in on the 7th. If this goes in, this means that that the system is in place. Now the battle is among different political groups what oppositions to take. The huge advantage, I think, in this has the fact that in the last parliamentary elections, the opposition took control of the Senate. So they proposed amendments that will be voted. They can be ruled back by the parliament, but there is no time before May 10th. That's why the other 2 dates are on the calendar. So I think at this stage now, very little is known how this will play out in Poland.
Okay, thank you. So you touched upon already that in Poland they are reopening the malls and other stores. So do you think it's again a pragmatic move of the government, of the Polish government, just on in order to the election to take place? Or actually, is it this in-person voting still option for the Polish government? Maybe if it will take place later in May, maybe this option is still open. Are they debating this issue that maybe in-person voting is role or is an option?
I think the voting in person is ruled out. I think everyone knows, including Minister of Health, government, the person, you cannot expose your population to such a threat. But there are different scenarios that I have not mentioned before that is discussed either formally or so. One was to change the constitution so that the president now will stay in power for another 2 years without being able to be a candidate for the next election. So it would mean his extra 2 years, but after not more, but it would allow to postpone the elections. But this would require a constitutional change, and both the ruling party and the opposition was not in favor. And this is also why the Deputy Prime Minister Jarosław Gowin left the government, because he was the main author, or he knew that the elections, and according to him, the elections should not happen in May. So this was his offer, which was not accepted. That's why now we see these different moves in the political scene. The second yesterday was circulated in media about resignation of our president as of now. So it would allow the Speaker of the House to take his office and call elections in the next 90 days, which would result August, until which hopefully the situation will be much better, and then voting in person would be possible. Yesterday in the morning, everyone was awaiting in Warsaw for a press conference of the president, who was scheduled in the morning. But at this time, the president announced his plans for the Baltic pipeline project. Instead of referring to his resignation, because there was no mention as well. So we don't know it was just fake news or just some informal story circulated just to stimulate different scenarios in place. So in general, there is no objections to have elections this year. but even in a mail-in voting system, which also makes sense, but the main argument is we have to be ready for it and make sure that those elections are free and fair. What we know as well, and it's not a secret in every country in the world, that when country is faced with a pandemic or with the follow-up in the sense of the economic recession that we will be facing, then it's more difficult to while being in power, which I think this is the bottom line here, that the ruling party says either elections now or in 2 years, because if we call them right after, when people will start feeling directly the impact, economic impact or health impact, we don't know, the chances of winning the elections in those kind of circumstances, it's much lower.
Exactly. Yeah, you are completely right. So that's the reason why is it so important for the ruling party, definitely. May I ask, what is the reaction of the international community on these political developments in Poland, on the scheduled presidential election? Mm-hmm. What is the reaction of the European Union, for example? Mm-hmm.
I think both European Commission, I think I like this this sentence, because sometimes we might be disappointed that EU is not acting very quickly and does not react. But at the end, I think it was Secretary General of the OECD in our conference, Tatra Summit 2 years ago. It was in the light of the reaction to the economic crisis of 2008 and financial crisis 2008. He says that EU likes, in the end, it turns out to make good choices. And so I think in this case, EU is acting pragmatically, slowly, and I have to say, by the amount of information now going, in the past 2 days I was not following exactly the stance on this particular issue of the presidential elections of the Commission. I don't think they made an official statement, but they are decisions that were in terms of the questions about the judiciary system in Poland, its reforms. They are progressing with dealing with the issues that were tackled they are directly addressing the presidential elections, but it's looking closely. I think this was also mentioned by Commissioner Vera Jourova in the light of the situation in Hungary and its emergency bill. Now legally raise any concerns, but EU is closely monitoring the situation. I think EU should react, and it can, if it does not protect its values that it's based on, then the European project would be put in danger.
So we can say the same in case of Poland, but also in case of Hungary, that the European Commission is, let's say, taking time, elaborating the situation, monitoring the situation, and maybe we will see the final conclusion in the months to come.
But I think the key.
But they are not reacting on the development.
But the rulings that were made in case of the judicial system reforms in Poland as well, they have been recently made by the EU Commission. So there was say, as well. But I think the key, and it would lead us to your another question about the V4 cooperation and the priority. I think that the budget, multi-annual financial framework, will be a key here. I think the discussion about the rule of law monitoring and linking it to the situation in a given country will come back. It will be raised by other governments as well. But my other observation is that in the past we might have seen kind of a east-west division in the in not bringing a constructive solution, to being negative after the migration crisis, not contributing enough. And I think then it basically took away the north-south divisions. But I think for the EU now, those division lines are coming back, and north-south can overwhelm the east-west divide, at least at I would say in the short and medium term, which is linked, of course, to the economic situation and tackling the pandemic, mostly in Italy, Italy and Spain, that were most affected by the COVID-19.
Okay, so when we stay with the European Commission or the European Union in general, because at the beginning of the pandemic in mid-March, Europe, we could observe, let's say, more nation-based response to the pandemic than like pan-European or European Commission response. And honestly, we can see a certain underestimation of the situation by the European Union or European Commission, especially in case of Italy. Do you think that this development changed the people's perception towards the individual government, but also towards the European Union in general? And has been the image of the European Union damaged by this underestimation, initial underestimation of the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think it's a very interesting question, and it's also a very complex one that can be replied in different, having different arguments in mind or from different view. Region, I think we at the very beginning of the pandemic, we conducted a very interesting. It was coordinated by CEPS Brussels on what is the view of the member states of. So I will not. I share the view quickly enough. I often cite this example that on the 100 days of the new mission, and which was March 10th, and the virus of the spread of the virus was not handled, was not talked about still. When in the same week, basically the other governments, the national governments, started to take uncoordinated or borders or imposing the temporary restrictions. So there was a lack of coordination on the EU side. But when it comes to, we know, and I think this is also raised by EU experts around the Europe, EU does not have as such. It has a more in the domain of the public health. It has more role rather than suggesting any solutions or measures for the member states. This is still in competency of provinces of the member states to deal with the public health in their countries. I think the closing of the internal borders could have been coordinated in advance. And maybe if the external EU border that is now closed until May 15 and maybe even extended, maybe if this decision would be made earlier, then the internal borders would not be closed. But we don't know it, and we cannot then now draft on this basis different scenarios. I think then, so basically the study are saying, which was observed among the member states, is that the EU did not pass the test of being a good communicator, even though then they speeded up the process of delivering protective equipment to Italy and Spain. France also was transporting Italian patients to and treating them in France. I think there was also an estimate that actually EU member states deliver more masks or medical equipment to Italy than China. Of the Chinese offensive media space, there was a feeling that they help more. As for the region, I say Czechs were always the most skeptical about the EU. I don't see the support level for the EU in the Visegrad countries damaged in any way. It is not worse than it was before, and we all know that on average the support for the EU countries in our region is much higher than in other Western countries. So there was kind of some skepticism about it and a bit of disappointment, but then with the big plans of the EU on rescue packages or allowing member states to use the unused funds allocated to them to tackle the pandemic directly, I think then it helped a bit, and then EU also got much better on communicating its success stories in and showing the solidarity with the countries that are most affected. In case of Slovakia, this was also a special case because Slovakia was facing the transition of the governments in the middle of transition. So actually the first measures were put in place by the former prime minister, and I think everyone have seen the picture of swearing in the new government and the parliament, where everyone was covered with masks, including fancy mask of the president of Slovakia that fits her outfit. But I think this also helped the society to accept using the face mask on the sideline of the political situation. But this transition was pretty smooth, and I would say there was no time, because everyone was in such a shock how our life has changed. There was not much decision on, EU as always was late to respond, but I don't see it would kind of rise anti-skepticism in Slovakia. What I'm more concerned, and in Poland I know also there is a high support for the EU still. What I'm more concerned is the country like Italy, that Eurosceptic votes are rising, and it will raise, and through also the campaign of China and Russia to some extent, where we would see the doctors or medical equipment sent with from Russia with love. It does not help EU to improve its image in Italy, and this might pose a risk in the short and medium term.
Yeah, it's really scary to see how the Italians are burning the EU flags. That was terrible. So would you say that maybe, because you said that the support for the European Union will not probably decrease, so would you say that maybe the support for the individual government will increase? They handled the crisis quite well.
Excuse me, I didn't get the question. That
the support for the individual governments in Visegrad will increase in the future, because they handled the crisis quite well.
I think it depends. I don't know what, but at least I think it all depends how we will end up, or what the situation would like look like. Because it's normal, and it's also in case in other democracies, be it Latin America and Europe, where people are afraid of dying, they need someone to take care of them and protect them, and then they are willing to things that are able to give up. Like going for a walk, or going to work, or taking our kids to kindergarten, or putting like face masks. We're so scared. Now the big question mark is how it will develop. In fact, it will help. Will the proposed measures by the individual member states, but also EU, will help to tackle it? Will be able to kick off our economies and also economy of Germany to extent that people can keep their jobs, and we can have any growth with the GDP growth. All the prognoses are just very scary now. So I think the level of support for the national governments, it cannot be taken for granted, and it might change very rapidly. And, once we know more what's the real impact of the crisis on the economy.
But I think that in general on the European level, but also on the national level, that we can actually achieve more when we stand together, when we cooperate, be it the humanitarian assistance. I mean, in this case, sending face masks from Czech, or the humanitarian assistance from Slovakia to Italy, and so on. So I think that could be maybe good conclusion, that only if we can stand together, we can achieve more, we can better recover our economies, we can support our businesses when the borders are open, and so on and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Can we agree on that?
Yes, I think so. And I think what is different now, if we compare it with the crisis that we've seen, there was basically asymmetric crisis that the member states were facing. Now this virus does not know borders, and it affects all of us in each and every member state to lesser or bigger degree. So it means that even there are now, I've always seen, and I think many people share this thought, that Schengen space, it's one of the biggest achievements of the EU, and some are afraid that temporary measures as well now might stay forever or for longer and become long-lasting. But on the other side, we can look at this, that this was closing or putting restriction of the borders. It does not have to always be seen as a egoistic move, but also as a show of solidarity to restrain the spread of other member states. So I think it just depends on the side of the coin, and how do we look at the given issue. For sure, this crisis cannot be tackled by individual member states, and more coordination on the EU level and more solidarity will be the recipes, the ingredients for the recipe of the success of individual member EU.
I think that's a very good conclusion. Thank you very much, Kinga, for your very interesting, very highly insightful analysis of the current situation in Central Europe, in which you got 4 countries. And in general, many thanks for the opportunity to have you today for our IDMonSite live talk.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you also for invitation Vienna and Bratislava are the closest located capitals in Europe, and I think we would both welcome to travel freely and see each other in person very soon.
I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you very much, Kinga. I would like to thank you also to our audience who join us today for our next IDMonSite live talk. Subscribe to our IDM Vienna YouTube channel if you have not done already so. Follow us on our social media channels, and I'm very much looking forward for the next IDMonSite discussion. Take care and see you then.